Welcome to the Advisor Pro podcast. Today, I'm happy to be joined by Oscar Gomez, co-founder and CEO of SoJoGo Consulting. Hey, Oscar.
Good morning, or hello.
Oh,
Good
good
morning
evening.
here. Yeah, it is morning for me.
So, hey, Oscar, you've got extensive background in organizational strategy, digital equity, civic innovation, and you're very much at the forefront of helping institutions think differently about leadership, transformation, and inclusive growth. Welcome.
Thanks. Thank you. Yes, actually, my background prior to this was in community and public health. I was in that role for 25 years. Gosh, I forget, 16 or 17 years as a chief executive. And yeah, it got to the point where, to be honest, and not just kind of encapsulate it, when I hit the 25-year mark and people were congratulating me for 25 years, I decided it was time to move on because I thought, well, staying in one place isn't necessarily an accomplishment, right? That's just, maybe there was a time where it was. So anyway, I walked away from that career and then just decided to work on my own or work for myself, better said. And then, because I've had staff off and on depending on how business is. And yeah, there's been times where I've been very tempted to go, to look for, to start looking for a job, because it's up and down, up and down with consultancy. But in the end, the quality of life and just, yeah, no, I'm still embracing running my own business. And once I've embraced all the uncertainty that comes with it, it's, I just realize I'm sticking with it.
So you mentioned the up and down, and it's something I kind of talk about continuously with the people I'm coaching. It's like, you got to
Yeah,
brace yourself here. It's like a bit of a,
absolutely.
stepping out of a bubble where I did it at Microsoft. I stepped out of this massive bubble and never paid for anything. I'd never, it was crazy. And people who stepped out very quickly stepped back in again because, well, this is the real world. Luckily, I had a chance to experience the real world before that. So what's the worst example of the down or the best example of the up? And are you in the middle somewhere now?
Gosh, the example of the down, and I'm gonna avoid the obvious. People always say when it's slow, it's a drought, because that's kind of an easy what to say. For me, I think the toughest thing is not having sort of a ready-made or a very accessible team. Working for myself can be tough. I think you know, when I was employed and I was chief executive, I took it for granted that I had a deputy director that she would let me go on and, I like this idea, go on. And then she would be like, okay, great. Let's narrow it down to two. Okay. Where would you like me to start? And
Yeah.
so having to kind of do that for myself, and I've worked with coaches off and on, and that's super, super helpful, but not having a team, sometimes not being able to really estimate properly how long something's going to take something technical because I don't have an executive assistant, or I've had one before. Right. But I think not having a ready-made team for administrative tasks, but also just to bounce ideas or to balance my strengths and my limitations, right? So
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely. I
think
mean,
that is, no, go ahead.
ju- I just recently, literally 2 months ago, just rehired a virtual assistant. Yeah, not
Mhm.
my first rodeo, and of course, you get burned a couple of times, and Frances, she's probably listening at some point. So kudos, Frances. She's been really, really, really effective. Offload a whole bunch of admin and this kind of things that I have to say, Oscar, don't make me happy. The admin stuff, it's not my forte.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'll just go real, a very, very specific example is that when I started my own, I struggled a lot, and I couldn't understand it because I'm like, I became a CEO super young. I was like 32 maybe, and it took me a while. But anyway, I was just like, I redesigned an organization, scope, all this other stuff. How can I? What is it? Why is it so hard for me to just complete this business plan or to execute this? Anyway, long story short, at 40, I was about to turn 49, 48. I was diagnosed with ADHD. I'm like, what? And then when I read about it, explained it, I'm like, oh my goodness, my life makes sense, But it was only because at that point that I realized it made sense because my skill set, my default skill set, because what I've learned to embrace it, I do have a lot of skills. It's what my default is, how I'm wired. My default is sort of visionary leadership, interpersonal strategy, right? And so none of those things fall into execution and administration, right? And so it finally made sense. So that
Yeah.
was a worst and a positive there, right? Because a lot of things made sense. And so I struggle with that still, but knowing that it reminds me of, okay, this is my default. Okay, don't beat myself up so much because I can't get this done. Well, sometimes I still do, or I need to find ways to do that. But so I guess to narrow it down specifically to this is that's what happens when you sort of launch on your own and you're building a team, is that you can't do everything, and putting that pressure on yourself is not helpful, or kind of beating yourself up. And so being the positive is that I've learned a lot about sort of I've learned a lot about, well, just myself in terms of like I said, how I'm wired, what my default is, what
Yeah.
my limitations are. And
Yeah.
then I think that the second part to that is not just learning, embracing that, right?
Totally.
Just being like, this is what I'm wired. This is what I'm good at. I can do the other things. It takes me a little bit. Might take more effort. Might take for this. Do I want to spend all my time doing that? Should I get up? So I kind of answered both of your questions in there, I
Yeah.
guess. If
Yeah,
that's
and then
okay.
some, and then some.
Yeah.
And it's, I identify with that, so heavily. I'm so easily distracted, but thankfully, I'm doing a million and one things.
Yeah.
And so, for many of the people who may or may not be, let's face it, Oscar, listening to this at some point, they're going to be distracted and they're going to be torn away and dragged into some new shiny thing. Yeah, working with a new startup or soon
Mhm.
doing something else. And I'm guilty of it still. And I figured out my style over the years, has been I'm a terrible manager. I'm not a good manager. I can
Mhm.
do stuff and I can hyper focus and get stuff done. And I'm a good leader, but I'm not good at then checking in on people or checking up on people, which then means, sometimes, yeah, maybe people will, run a few kind of rings around me, etc. But I've tried to kind of give everyone, certainly in the business that we have now, autonomy and ownership and
May I
trust and
offer
those kind of things. Yeah.
May I offer a reframe? Because this is when it's not, it's again, it's a reframe that I'm offering, is that sometimes
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that we're not good at something. It's that something is not our default way. It's not our strength. It takes a lot more effort. Or simply put, it's not something that excites us, that just comes natural to us. And that's okay, right? That's okay. Because if we really put our effort to something, we can always learn a skill, right? We can always learn a skill. It's the attitude. But so I think working for yourself, that's what's really, I guess that's a lot of things I learned, is being kind of like, these are the things that I'm not skillful with, and it's okay. Do I want to put the time into doing some? Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I kind of have to. Or sometimes like, let's find a way to balance that. Hire somebody, get a thought partner, do this. Now with AI, you can do a lot of that stuff. So I'm sorry, that was just the reframe, because I've learned there's that negative, not necessarily when you say we're not good at that, it's yeah, but we can do it, right? We can
No,
learn a
I'm
skill
terrible.
set. Yeah, no, no, and I get it. Like yeah, I'm terrible at estimating how long something's going to take. Sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, it's going to take 4 hours. It's going to be miserable. And then I start, I'm like, oh, that took 20 minutes. And
Exactly.
then there's something that I think, oh, I'll get it done in an hour. And then I'm like, oh my, it's 2 days. When is this going to get completed? So that is definitely not my strength. I have to really apply myself to really break down the steps. This is how I'm going to.
Exactly. And is that your default in terms of how you help clients? And I guess that leads on to your motivation for
Yeah.
starting Sojo.
Well, yeah. One thing that I've learned in terms of my business was that, I'm able to build in sort of, I could be, I have the relatability, the empathy, and the credibility to work with executives and with governance boards, because I went through that whole process. And I started at 32 because of attrition, right? I was just kind of after, so, and so with that, I bring in sort of, I really kind of lean into that related that personal experience without sort of, I'm able to bring in those emotions, that empathy, understanding what someone's going through, and sort of being able to kind of walk alongside them, kind of. So I think that's where a lot of my skill sets are. Strategy is definitely my default, and I enjoy it. I love it. But I'm sorry, I want to make sure I stick to your question.
You crack on, Oscar. You go on.
Yeah. Well, where I am now in terms of helping and working, supporting clients, is that, when I started off on my own, I really leaned into, well, and better said, led with the focus on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I struggled a little bit. I was surprised, because I struggled with, in terms of the sale, right? Well, because most folks immediately thought of, oh, okay, talk to my HR team. Okay, talk to the managers. Whereas I saw it as something that no, there's a skill set that comes in here with being a leader, right? How do you embrace inclusion? How do you embrace equity? Meaning, so, it's not necessarily, sometimes fairness looks different for different people, but the principles are the same, right? You still, and so there's a leadership. It took a while harder to sell because the default out there was like, oh, you go through these trainings, you build a skill set, and I'm like, no, there's a competency there. So that was there, and then in the U.S. there was the cultural backlash, but prior to that, to DEI, and this is where some really good friends and close clients gave me a heads up that the Supreme Court's there were rulings that started basically changing or dismantling or what the things around diversity and inclusion, and they were like saying their in-house counsels were saying this is going to continue, right? This is going to continue, and sure enough, I started seeing in my business where scope of work started like scaling down. People weren't as interested, so I had to shift. I had to pivot, and so two things that I pivoted towards that I still feel well, I know fall under that, especially under inclusion. One is strategic storytelling and narrative building, right? There's a whole campaign to that. And it's a competency. And maybe as a leader, you can sort of build some of those competencies or understand them enough to know that that's a priority in your amongst your team. Storytelling can apply to just about anything. It brings people together. It's connection. It also is able to sort of your marketing, right? You can build a whole new campaign, your identity. There's so many things that affect the storytelling, and there's a skill set and an art. There's both a science and an art to it. So I leaned into that. And then more recently, what I leaned into, and it's getting a lot of traction, is, for lack of a better marketing term, is organizational wellness, right? There's self-care, but then there's a wellness, the priority as an organization. And that really, I leaned into that because of the uncertainty and turmoil that is happening in a lot of communities in the state. And then right now around funding, there's been Medicaid cuts, which I know is
Yeah.
affecting hospitals, health center. It's just, and I remember what that was like. And I remember the anxiety and the stress and how do you plan for that? And then I remembered also the additional anxiety where I would see my staff anxious about like, what's going to happen? Is this grant going to get cut? Are we going to who's going to get laid off? It's then being like, oh my goodness, I have to show up for them. And that made me anxious. So that relatability made me think like, I'm sure there's a lot of folks going through that. So yeah, that's what I've leaned into in the last 3 months. It's just gotten a lot of traction, and I really think of it in terms of a strategy. Right? I look at strategy, and then there's how do you do it? How is it strategic priority? Are you budgeting for it? Are you onboarding people with that? Right from the onboarding, are you building a culture? Do you have your policies for it? Are you supporting and coaching your managers and supervisors so that they can bring that in when they supervise?
Absolutely.
And so are you modeling that, right? Because you can tell folks that, but if you model that, it's leadership. People look at everything. So that's
Yeah.
sort of and again, I lead in with that, and not necessarily DI for strategic reasons, DEI for strategic reasons, but it is part of that. It is part of it. Both storytelling and organizational wellness are important competencies and skill sets and strategic priorities for that.
And it drives innovation through the business. It drives
Everything.
cultural
It drives
resilience.
innovation. It builds teams. It builds connections. It builds shared purpose.
It's
Uh,
been Oscar, it's been a bit of a theme this week on recordings, just resilience.
yeah.
We I guess we hear a lot about, the new generation and their lack of resilience, but maybe one could argue that they have to be the most resilient out of all of us, considering what's coming or is what
Yeah.
already is here in terms of the new world of
Yeah.
work. So how do you build a culture of innovation? How do you build that resilience? How do you make sure that leadership is going all the way through, yeah, it goes all the way through all the leaders, making sure everyone is accountable, everyone is respectful, and all the great things that come from, the DEI stuff that you've done in the past. How? I mean, is it not impossible mission?
Right, right. You know, as you were saying that, what that's well, as you were saying that, the thought that kept popping into my head, and as a leader, I hesitate. I don't like using sort of superlatives, but so much of the work comes down to people because I mean, to sound trite, uh, people are basically the most valuable resource, right? Financially too, but and so looking at that, everything from like meeting deliverables execution, that's crucial. There's no you've got to look at margin to complete the mission, right? You got to do it absolutely. But at the end of the day, it's about people, right? And that evolves. And the world's changing, generations are changing. And so, we've got to look at other things like organizational wellness and storytelling, because The world's changing. We're super connected, information, and just think about that. And so I think when that sort of, this is going to sound contradictory, but I believe that there's more than one North Star sometimes. But if you put one of those as your North Star, maybe no more than three, I think even then that's too much. It's about people, right? And so, and that has to change, and the flexibility, and as a leader, it's okay not to have all the answers, and in fact, it's important to accept that you don't have all the answers. But who's your team? How can you get them? And it's about people. That's a North Star.
Interesting, interesting. I mean, I've said this a few times on recordings this week. Like people are asking me now, what should I focus on? And it's like, well, actually be the human.
Yeah, absolutely,
We got the left brain stuff almost outsourced now to ChatGPT. It would feel like,
absolutely.
in- to my mind, that's a great
Yeah,
thing. 'Cause my left
yeah,
brain has always been held me back.
yeah, yeah,
If
yeah.
we think about humanity, if we think about transformations that we can now still foster in terms of like making these transformations stick in the clients that you're involved with, can you tell us maybe a little bit more about that? Because it's very easy, isn't it, to engage with the client and they say, yeah, 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 we're going to do that, we're going to do that. And, somewhat, well, one of us walks off campus and all of a sudden everything's back to how it was. There's got to be leadership from the top in order to drive those kind of transformations through.
Right, right, right. So could you repeat the question specifically? I want to make sure I'm kind of leading into that. So what's the nugget of the question in there?
Yeah. So what have you learned really about what makes these transformations stick?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I think you said it begins from the very top, and it's a commitment from the very top, and it's a public commitment. And if it's actually in writing, for example, if it appears in personnel policies or one of your values or something to be held accountable, right? Because I think leaders want to be held accountable. We don't necessarily say that, but we want to be held accountable. We want to have guardrails, if you will. We want to have something to be sort of measured by. So that accountability is super important. I'd say the second, I know when I when I work with clients is sort of saying, okay, what are the starting points? What are the first three steps, right? Who's going to be the lead? Again, sometimes people think what are the first three steps? And then um, just off the top of my head is who's the lead person for this? Who is your second person that can be accountable? Who's going to run with this, right? Because again, sometimes we think we're going to do it, and then we commit to it. Like, oh, I don't have enough time, and someone go on, and of course we don't, right? So then, who's the person that's going to lead with it? That's not to say you. Then we have to build in time to say, like, okay, I'm going to check in on this person. I'm going to support them. How do you budget for that? And a lot. So off the top of my head, I think those are the main things. It's just accountability, publicly accountable. And writing what does it appear, even if it's just in a staff meeting or leadership meeting, and it's held at the minutes, right? And you do that. And as a leader, also, this sometimes it doesn't necessarily become natural for us, or it's not our default, or feels uncomfortable. But I would say just take the bold step of saying, like, you know what, hold me accountable to this. How can I be held accountable to this?
Mm.
Let's talk about this at the next meeting. Say that because you're inviting people to support your leadership. Um, you're sort of building that it's kind of a safe vulnerability. It might feel a little uncomfortable, but in the end, it's a good thing. It's a good thing because we know we want to be held accountable. So ask folks sometimes if we don't know, just say, how can we be held? How can we be held accountable to it? How can I be held accountable to it?
And when you then turn up to a new client, what does the conversation look like with the champion has brought you in there,
Yep,
but now
absolutely.
navigating through the different leadership stack, the different people involved, how do you navigate those conversations? Because some of them might not be as open. What's a tactic there?
In terms of leaders not necessarily being open to certain,
Yeah.
yeah. I would say, have a conversation, ask them what is the resistance about, what makes them uncomfortable, right? And again, there's so many trite terms in or terms that are in our culture the last 20 years, but there's that leaning into the resistance. And although sometimes, but it's so true, the resistance. The one thing, a nugget here that, gosh, my very first coach gave me this some almost 25 years ago. And he said, all change brings resistance, all change, especially the change that we want. And that's even the change that we want. And if there isn't resistance, there isn't going to be change. So lean into that, right? And also just help, as a leader, when they see resistance, saying, no, no, it's a good thing, right? Find out what the resistance is about. Where is the resistance? Push that. Because if there isn't resistance, it's not going to take hold. It's not going to happen. All change. So I would say when there's a resistance, have a conversation. What is the resistance about? What makes them uncomfortable? What's the fear? What's the sometimes not necessarily fear, but what's the just what's the hang up about? Right? Have that conversation. Sometimes we don't necessarily even know. Client doesn't necessarily even know what it is, right? Because they just like, yeah, I don't want to do that. There's sometimes there isn't the luxury of time to sit there and think, what is this about? So I would say just, have a conversation, lean into that little nugget of resistance.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. So turning up to that new client, trying to navigate, trying to do the, I guess, the political soft shoe shuffle, trying to understand who's who, all these kind of things. I guess, many new advisors are going to be used to that from their corporate career, navigating those kind of complex environments. And, hopefully they can bring that into their consulting practice.
absolutely.
Oscar, I've really enjoyed this, and I could carry on talking for hours, but we've only got a short amount of time. So, couple of questions, if I may, just to kind of round off. You quote, "Inclusive transformation isn't a nice to have; it's a survival strategy. The future will belong to those who co-create with, not just build for communities." Love that. Yeah. So
I
transformation,
mean,
it's yeah.
people say it's the world of tomorrow. No, it's the world of now. That is now, right? Especially when we think about younger generations, there's more of them. It's sort of us leaders, right? But we get stuck in thinking like, no, no, this is the world of tomorrow. No, it's the world of now. We're still thinking from, and naturally so, we're bringing the perspective of our generation, right? But there's so many more. There's a couple generations, I want to say, behind us that are there, right? So it's the world of now, and I think that's the one thing that's really important. Folks, go, oh yeah, yeah, we've got to get ready for that. For no, for the future. No, you got to get ready for what's now.
Exactly. Hey, and Oscar, in terms of some of the guys I'm coaching, burnout's a bit of a possibility. They've
Absolutely.
gone out from corporate, and all of a sudden they're taking on too much. Now I know you're in Mexico City. You're living the dream out there. How are you going to reset? Let's assuming that the rest of today's a bit tough. How are you going to reset? Does it involve salsa or
Yeah, no, you know what? This is gonna sound boring. You said salsa. It's gonna sound kind of boring, but the boring is kind of the night. It's the simple things or the ordinary things, and sort of embracing and enjoying. What I'm well, not the morning, but I have a wonderful dog, which I'm surprised he's actually been very quiet. He's a he's a Malinois German Shepherd mix, and so he's incredibly active. And the move to Mexico City has definitely it's changed him, right? It would naturally so. So, but anyway, just going out with walks. In the morning is kind of tough because I'm not a morning person. It's more like I have to do this. But I look forward to I take my middle day, but I look forward to the afternoon walk. Absolutely. It's his time. I don't have to think about it. I'm still, making sure he's on leash, but enjoying that and that's just time. That's just, I
beautiful?
don't have to think about going to the dog park. That is actually a huge reset, embracing that. Because I definitely have that hyperactivity. I get up and move and walk, and it's okay. And if I need to do that, if I need to do that every 20 minutes, some days, that's fine. If I need to do it often, just going to taking around the block here, walk. I don't put my earphones on when I walk. I want to, but it's the idea of like listening, just taking in what's around. It can be stressful, but sometimes it's wonderful. Just hearing life going on around me, right? And then I guess off and on for about 15 years, but definitely here in Mexico City, I've been more consistent. Is I have a meditation practice. I actually do chanting because it's a little for ADHD. It's a little bit. I'm doing something, but I kind of doing that. And even if I can sometimes squeeze, I want to say I'm going to do 20 minutes a day. Sometimes I can't, but even just that routine of saying even 5 minutes, right? So whatever that sacred space is, and I really think about it, this is sacred to me. My mornings are sacred. Like my dog, my coffee. I embrace hey, listen. I'm a slow starter, and so I just kind of protect that morning as much as possible. Sometimes my clients want it early. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I would say, yeah. What's your sacred space? What are those sacred 20 minutes? And protect that. Just protect it. Block it out. Whatever you want to do, and embrace that moment. Just be in that and say, this is my sacred time. You can have two, and just that's what I've got to
Absolutely.
offer.
Oscar, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's great insight, and thank you. And so, look, anyone looking to reimagine leadership and looking at their organizational, making sure that the organizational wellness and happiness is there, then go over to sojoconsulting.com.
SoJoGo Consulting. By the way, SoJoGo is named after my parents. My parents are named Socorro and Jose Gomez because, as a storyteller, my story is just a continuation of theirs. So I named it after my parents.
Oscar,
Consulting.com. Thank you so much. I enjoyed this.
thank you, Oscar. Mucho gusto and gracias.
Igualmente. Igualmente. Buen día.